This is Radio TV Phono Nut with some wind chimes in the background, and if we're lucky, we'll also hear some rap music blaring or car horns going off or loud talking before this video is over with. But anyway, I thought I'd take a few minutes to reflect on how radio used to be and how radio is today and why it's no longer a pleasure to listen to. I can remember growing up in the 80s and early 90s, I'd say up through the mid 90s, radio was actually a pleasure to listen to. You had real, live, human, local DJs who were actually in a studio locally playing records, CDs, carts, reel-to-reel tape, whatever. They knew the music they were playing. They had a sense of humor and kept you entertained. And they actually took your phone calls. If you wanted to hear a song, you just called them up and requested it, and they'd go back to the music library, pull the record, and play it for you. And also, radio stations had an extensive news department back then. You got a good dose of national, state, and local news. They kept you well informed. The commercials were even interesting in some cases. Well, eventually radio stations started hiring these guys and gals known as consultants. And what a consultant is a person who comes down from an unknown land and tells a radio station how to run things and be more efficiently. And after all, you know, they know more about what you want to hear on the radio than what you know, and they have to be right because the radio station's paying them too much to be wrong. Well, they came in and told the radio stations that you need to fire all of the DJs and replace them with this computer system. You need to shorten the playlist from 5,000 songs down to 300 songs. And then you need to do away with that news department. Nobody wants to hear news on the radio anymore. And as a result, we now have boring radio. There's very little live local DJ interaction anymore. Everything is usually done by a computer with no kind of DJ input at all. Or if it does sound like you're listening to a DJ, it's more than likely something that's voice tracked. It's not a live human being there running the show, and they play the same limited songs over and over again. In fact, you turn on to the classic rock station around town, if you want to call it that, and it's pretty much Hotel California and Benny and the Jets 10 times a day. And every once in a while you're here and you're listening to Meridian's classic hit station, blah, blah, blah. And then they go back to playing the same music and commercials again. Well, I can get that same effect out of my record collection. Only difference, I don't have to listen to commercials, and my musical selection is a lot broader. And I often hear people in the broadcast industry talking about how bad radio stations are hurting. Well, guess what, y'all? You did it to yourself. You shot your own self in the foot when y'all all got greedy and decided to save money by getting rid of everything that the listener wants to hear. And the result is nobody's listening anymore. I mean, why do you think everybody's listening to satellite radio now? On satellite radio, at least you get a wider variety of music. Pretty much current day radio sounds like a CD player set to random play with the commercials added in it. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to talk to an older guy who owned a little AM station across the state line, but I could receive them here. I think they went on the air in something like 1970, and at the time they played like a mixed bag of music. They might do country in the morning, soul for part of the day, rock for part of the day. Well, you get the idea. Well, by the time I came along, they had pretty much turned into an easy listening station, elevator music style station. And by the early 2000s, things had gotten so bad that he was only able to keep it on the air for a few hours in the morning, but he told me, he said, my bread and butter is my FM station, and I know I could change the format of the AM to something that would bring in more money, but I can't bring myself to do that. I like the old music, and I know other people like the old music, and I'm going to keep it going as long as I can. Well, a bunch of the older DJs from my community that were either fired from the other stations when they were replaced with a computer, or they retired from other stations, got together with this guy, and they breathed new life into the radio station, got it back going to a full daytime station again. In the morning they played big band and standards. In the afternoon they played classic country, and on Saturdays they played oldies rock and roll. There wasn't a computer nowhere to be found in the control room. It was still all old school, records, CDs, carts, and it was all DJ programmed, and the DJs knew their music, and they played more than the same 50 songs over and over again. In fact, residents around the area were so happy about this that they even wrote letters to the editor of the local newspaper praising the station for finally putting something decent on AM again. Well, unfortunately, the owner of the station passed away unexpectedly, and the guy's son took it over, and you know what often happens when kids take over a business, they run it into the ground. Well, he kept the things the way they were for a little while, and then one day after the end of a broadcast day, he called a surprise staff meeting, handed everybody a letter, told them their services were not needed anymore, and to please clear out your belongings as soon as possible. And they changed the format to some automated black gospel junk that nobody listens to. From what I've heard, the only way the station makes any money is by preachers buying airtime on the station. They're certainly not making money any other way. So that just proves my point right there. This station initially gave people what they wanted to hear, and people listened, but when they took away what people wanted to hear, it generated more letters to the editor of the paper, but this time it was from irate listeners who didn't like the switch. And speaking of things changing, the Black Gospel AM station here, they were continuing to play Christmas music through the middle of January. Well, a couple of days ago I turned it on and I heard this. Okay, that wasn't what I heard, but what I heard was some generic, sounded like high school marching band music. And I know a lot of stations do that when they're about to change formats. It sounds like now they're kind of gone back to the gospel format, but it'd be nice if somebody would, if they put an oldies station on AM, but I know that'll never happen. They're not going to put anything on that somebody might actually want to hear. Instead, they'll probably end up putting on some paid programming for some geriatric vitamin supplements or some crap like that. Okay, so they're now running the audio from their FM country station onto the AM station here. Okay, I'm back. Had to go dump the camera. And speaking of cameras, here lately I've gotten some comments from people wanting to know when I'm going to dump this old worn out junky camera and get a modern HD camera. Well, to answer your question, it's not going to happen until this one stops working. When this one stops working and can't be fixed, which it probably can't be, then we'll see about replacing it. But I don't replace things just for the sake of replacing them. Alright, anyway, where were we? Back to the radio. The AM stations now started back with the high school band music again. So yeah, something's going on with them. I'm sure they're getting ready to change formats or do something, and like I said, it would be nice if they would switch to an oldies format, but that probably won't happen. You know, like I said earlier, the consultant knows more about what we want to hear than we know. So, like I said, they'll probably add some stupid format that nobody wants to hear. And speaking of oldie stations, we had a real oldie station here that back in the late 90s, early 2000s, but I think it went away around 2003. It was a FM station that was owned by Clear Channel, and you know how that is. Everything Clear Channel touches turns brown, so no wonder they failed. No, actually, I think I know why they failed, because every time you turned it on, you either heard stuff like The Lion Sleeps Tonight, My Boyfriend's Back, Brown Eyed Girl, the Pina Colada Song, California Dreamin'. You know, people don't want to hear the same stuff over and over again. You know, throw some variety in there. Heck, hire me as the program director. I'll program an oldie station for you. I've got lots of oldies here. And I don't listen to the radio much anymore. When I do, it's usually at night to Eddie Stubbs on WSM out of Nashville. He's an actual real DJ who plays a decent variety of music, and he's a pleasure to listen to. When I'm listening locally, it's usually to 1290. They play a lot of older R&B and soul, and I don't really care for this, but the older stuff they play I can deal with. And actually, the declining state of radio is one reason why I haven't really been concentrating on obtaining more radios. Yeah, if I find something cheap or interesting, I'll get it, but you know, I hate to be negative here, but sooner or later, over-the-air radio as we know it is going to go away, just like over-the-air analog TV broadcasting went away. When they started announcing that in the late 90s, early 2000s, I said, nah, that'll never happen. They can't do that. Well, guess what? They did. And if they did it to TV, they'll do it to radio. And all these nice old radios that I have and many other collectors have will pretty much be a doorstop unless we come up with adaptive means of listening to them, just like we've had to do with our vintage TV sets. So that's one reason why I've kind of been focusing more on record players and stuff such as that, because at least with record players, as long as I have the records to play on them, I can use them as intended. And I'll tell you another story about how consultants ruin everything. I was told about an FM oldies station in the New Orleans area that had actual real DJs who had been in the area for decades. They knew their listeners, they knew the music, and they had a wide variety of music to play. Well, the station was sold, and the new owners hired a consultant to come down, and that consultant from New York City told them, you don't need to be playing all that music, and they handed them something like a 500-song playlist and said, this is what the people want to hear. Well, eventually the station bombed because all of the DJs, the ones that weren't fired, got a belly full and left. And then I think the station shut down or changed formats or something, but you know, once again, had they left it well enough alone, it would have probably succeeded. As we end this rant about how the radio stations are now and reminiscing about how things used to be, let's look at something from radio's golden age. Last Sunday I got a surprise phone call out of the blue from someone who had bought a bunch of stuff at a local estate sale of a radio guy who had passed away. Naturally, I didn't know about it beforehand, or I'd have been there bright and early to buy up everything. But anyway, he had this and some Dynaco amplifiers and other things. Well, the smaller stuff, he was real hung up on those eBay prices. It's getting so I can't go anywhere anymore and try to buy anything without hearing about what it goes for on eBay. Well, you know what? I don't give a damn what it goes for on eBay. I'm buying local because I want a deal. If I wanted to pay big bucks for something, I'd get on eBay and buy it. But anyway, he had this RCA broadcast console, and there's the power supply that goes to it. And I was able to buy it for what I consider a reasonable price, probably because it's really something that's too big to ship. And we think this come out of a local radio station in the area, WCOC, which they haven't been around since 1973, when one of the other local radio stations bought them out to get their more powerful frequency. But yeah, this is an all-tube job, as you can see here. You can also see it's coated with nicotine. You can see the little area of the lid that I cleaned there, and the area here on this transformer and on the chassis. Yeah, it's real yummy, isn't it? I mean, if we'll do this to a piece of equipment, just think of what it does to your lungs. But I don't know exactly how old this is, but it could be as old as about 1941. These things were made during the 40s, so I don't have an exact year on that, but it is probably at least 70 years old. Here's the power supply, and you can see someone has replaced some capacitors with some Sprague atom capacitors. I looked at them, and they all have 73 date codes on them, so it tells me this was used at least up until then. Now all the old paper capacitors are still in this thing, so it will have to be recapped. Now my plan for this is to completely overhaul it, and it will become the heart of my little Part 15 radio station. And since this is a tube board, I'm going to try to make the station utilize as much tube equipment as possible. And my little Part 15 station will probably have better programming than the big boy stations that are blazing the airwaves today. So yeah, all you radio executives that are crying in your beer about how bad you're hurting, well, I really don't feel sorry for you, because if you'd bring back what people want, you might not be hurting so bad. I realize radio is a business, and it's all about making money just like any other business, but there has to be a happy medium there, and you have to have some passion about the job that you're in, like the guy I described earlier who had the little AM station. You know, he made his money off of the FM station, and he was very adamant about keeping his AM station a decent music station. And I think he'd be rolling over in his grave now if he knew what his son did to it.